We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. I wanted to welcome everyone to the webinar this evening. I'm so happy that you could all join us here. I know that unfortunately ransomware and cybersecurity probably isn't something that people want to be thinking about or wanting to be dealing with. I'm going to show you some unfortunately sobering statistics that unfortunately this is a real issue, and as much as I wish that hiding your head in the sand would make the problem go away, that's just not reality at this point. So I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping and then we'll get into the presentation. First and foremost, as I've been doing for all my webinars the last 20 months or so, I hope that everyone is staying healthy and safe out there. I kind of hope that by this winter we would be out of the woods, but it looks like it's going to be another long winter, I guess, depending on what area of the country you're in. So please stay safe and healthy and have safe and healthy holidays. A couple of housekeeping tip points. First off, this webinar is recorded. I record all my webinars. If for some reason you can't stay until the end, don't worry about it. I will be able to send off that recording. I'm probably going to send it off tomorrow. Usually I send out a link. Sometimes I put it on YouTube as well, but I will make sure that that goes out. The other thing that I always get questions about is CE, continuing education credits. This is eligible. I am licensed to do California-based CE. Basically, as far as I know, it's good anywhere in the country. I mean, if you go to CDA or some meeting, you get California credits, and that's perfectly fine. You have to stay here for the bulk of the webinar. We've had sometimes that people will email me and say, hey, I was on and I checked and they were there for 4 minutes, and then they can't understand why they didn't get a CE form. We get audited. We have to show that someone was actually here for the bulk of the webinar, and it's not worth losing our CE license to give it out. So as long as you're here, you stay on, you will be sent the CE. That's done automatically. There's nothing you need to do on your end. I will send that out probably tomorrow as well. There's no quiz or registration or test or anything like that. When you're done, you'll just log out, and I will make sure that those CEs go out tomorrow as well. My whole philosophy with the webinars that I do is that I want to make sure that you get your questions answered, and that hopefully you leave this evening with one piece or more, hopefully a lot more, but at least one piece of information that you didn't have beforehand. If that's all that you get out of it, great, then I've accomplished my goal. I think hopefully you're going to learn a lot of new things this evening, but even if you get just one, that's the bottom line goal. I think a lot of you probably know who I am, but just as a little background, my company is The Digital Dentist. I've been writing articles under the Digital Dentist moniker since 1998. I was a full-time practicing periodontist and implant dentist. Along the way, I became certified in computer repair and networking. And in 2002, I moved out to California when they passed licensure by credential, thinking I'd be able to practice and do what I'm doing now. Unfortunately, they didn't mention the 15,000 people on the waiting list, so it was a year, and during that time, I started doing what I'm doing now full time. And honestly, I just didn't have a huge desire to go back in and do perio. What I do is to work with offices all over North America, and we actually have a few in Australia and Great Britain that need help with their IT. For a long time, it was just computers and monitors and networking and digital X-ray sensors and cone beam and all that type of stuff. Over the last, I'd say 8-9 years, we've really kind of specialized. We'd still do all that other stuff, but a lot of our clients really have asked us for help with HIPAA compliance and with cybersecurity. Maybe one of the only good things that comes out of this whole discussion is that the things that you do to get yourself more cyber secure are also going to get you more HIPAA compliant. Notice I didn't use the words 100% compliant. There is no such thing. There are 700 pages of HIPAA rules and regulations. We hear in the news all the time about these large organizations that have to do large, huge settlements or fines that they get charged. And these are organizations with full-time HIPAA compliance officers on the payroll. So what chance do you have? That doesn't mean that you can't and shouldn't try to get as compliant as reasonably possible, but you can't get 100% compliant. If you're working with a company that promises they can get you fully compliant, or that they guarantee that you're going to pass a HIPAA audit, then I would suggest find someone else, run for the hills, because no such thing exists. So what are the goals for this evening? I've already done my introduction. I'm going to structure this a little bit like an FAQ, frequently asked questions. I'll go through, here's the questions that I get asked on a given day. I certainly will. My goal is to get to all those questions and make sure we answer them. What I thought I would do is make this a little more interactive by giving you a little quiz. I think it's about 15 questions or so. You don't have to type in your answers. I'm not going to have time to go through it anyways. Just think about the answer in your head, and I will give you the answer. And we'll use this as a bit of a framework for the actual seminar, the webinar that we'll be doing. At the very end, I'm going to make a few offers for people that are going to be good until the end of the year. And then I'm going to open up in Q&A. Like I said, it's really important for me that you get your questions answered. So whatever is involved in doing that, I'm here to help with that. I've got nowhere else I need to be after this. So what are those FAQs, the frequently asked questions? A lot of times people, I'm talking about cybersecurity and they're like, well, what is cybersecurity? I mean, how do we define that? We'll certainly do that this evening. Hopefully most of you have heard of ransomware. It's almost impossible to pull up a website or news or TV news and not hear about the latest ransomware attack. But I think we should have at least a basic understanding of exactly what it is and how it functions. Does HIPAA play a part in any of this? I'll give you a hint. The answer is yes. It does play a big part in this. How do I protect my data? I think this is probably the question that I get asked the most by clients or potential clients, is that, in my opinion, your patient data is far and away the biggest asset that you have. So I think it is unbelievably critical that you protect that data as best you possibly can. What does a firewall do? We're going to answer that as well. Let's do a little bit of housekeeping here. Okay. Sorry about that. I'm just moving slides around here. What is application whitelisting and ring fencing? We're going to talk about this. I am really excited about this whole concept of application whitelisting, of all the things that we have done for HIPAA compliance, for cybersecurity. In my opinion, if you're only going to do one thing, and I don't recommend doing one thing, the days of slapping some antivirus software on your computer and be done are unfortunately long gone. But if you were only going to do one thing, it would be application whitelisting, and I'll talk about this. We've actually we tested it for about 6 months. We've been offering it to our clients for the last 8 months or so. We have yet to see a single virus with anyone that is on this type of system, and that was not the case beforehand. So we'll talk about what that is and what ring fencing is and why it's something I think you need. How do I keep my systems up to date? This is certainly something that I think is important. There's laws about this, and we'll talk about this, but how do you do that actually? What's the best way to back up my data? It's like when a patient goes to 5 dentists, they're going to get 5 different treatment plans. And you go to 5 IT companies, you're going to get 5 different suggestions on how to back up your data. I'm going to give you what I recommend and how we do it. It doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. Doesn't mean it's necessarily the best. Well, I think it is the best, but we wouldn't recommend it if it wasn't. But I think that, and I'll explain why we do it the way that we do it. Do you have to encrypt your data? And if so, how? I'll explain to you what the HIPAA law is about encryption and how you go about doing that, because that is really critical. And finally, what's a risk assessment? We talk a lot about this. You hear HIPAA auditors will talk to you about risk assessments. Is it something you have to do? And if so, how do you do it? So why are we even talking about this? Why is this such a critical issue? And like I said, it's almost impossible not to go onto your local favorite news website and hear about this. This was over the summer. There was a lot of us in IT use software that's called RMM, Remote Management and Monitoring, and the most popular one out there is one called Kaseya. It's not one that we use, but a lot of people do it. And they had over 1,500 of Kaseya customers. And when I say that, it's exponentially how much it affects their customers, because these are IT companies. Most of us are managing hundreds, if not thousands, of computers. If you can affect the IT company and get into their system, you're now able to affect all the computers that they manage as well. So if someone, for example, were to get into the portal that we use to manage our clients remotely, they would have access to somewhere around 1,500 computers that they could do whatever they want with. So obviously we want to try to prevent that from ever happening, but this is the types of thing that we see on a regular basis. Many of you probably heard about Colonial Pipeline, that this was compromised back in June as well. Really affected gasoline supplies on the East Coast. What many of you may not have been aware of, and I highlighted this here on the screen, is that it was the result of a single compromised password. You know, with everybody working remotely because of COVID, all it took was one password that was made available to these hackers. And I use that term lightly. I mean, a hacker is not necessarily a bad thing, but in this particular case, we are talking about people who are criminals. How they got a hold of that password, that remains to be seen. You know, maybe they got it accidentally, maybe it was sold to them, who's to say? But it took basically one password that was compromised to cause billions of dollars in potential damages. This was, I actually just got this about an hour ago, just online, and I said, oh, this would be good for my presentation. International Data Corp, they did a report a few months ago, and they showed that worldwide, about 1/3 of all organizations have experienced a ransomware attack or breach in the last year. That is a staggering number. I'll give you some numbers that relate to healthcare in a few minutes. It lines up very perfectly with that. If you happen to think that dental offices are immune to this, I would think again, that's not the case at all. This was back in 2019. There were about 400 offices, mostly in the Wisconsin area, that were hit with ransomware. There was another 100 or so that was hit in Colorado. And you see here, it was from an IT provider. That's really the way that they get in here. A lot of us use this system, like I said, called RMM. The one that we use is called ConnectWise Control. There's Kaseya, there's other ones out there. When we set up our portal, we use what's called two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. When we log into our portal, that gives us access to all those clients. We also have to then get a second code that's sent to our cell phone or to our email and enter that code. Without that code, you can't get in. Those companies that were hit, the ones in Wisconsin, one in Colorado, had not implemented that level of protection. And again, once a ransomware criminal can get into your portal, they can push out files to all those clients simultaneously, files like ransomware files. And it's a pretty nasty business. Some more statistics, if you're not really believing me that this stuff is out there and how critical it is. Ransomware accounted for 41% of all cyber insurance claims in the first half of 2020. Most of our, we do insurance for our clients, and the policies have gone up about 40–50% over the last year or so. There's some talk that a lot of insurance carriers are just not going to even provide for ransomware protection going forward, just because it's such an expensive undertaking for them. I apologize that this isn't a larger screen, but hopefully you can see some of the numbers here, which I think are critical. 34% of healthcare organizations were hit by ransomware. That lines up exactly with that previous slide, that 1/3 of all businesses were hit with ransomware. 65% said that they were successful in encrypting the data. Less than half, which I think is, again, a staggering number, used backups to restore data. I mean, that number should be 99%, but unfortunately, it's below half. A good 1/3 of people paid to get their ransom back. The next one down, I think, is really critical number to know. Is that on average, only 69% of the encrypted data was restored. Even if you pay the ransom, even if you get that unlocked key, there is a chance that on average, about 1/3 of your data, you won't be able to recover. And, if it's some minor files, maybe you get okay with it. But, in practice management software, a lot of times you have very key files, ones that end with a .dat or a .idx. And if those are the ones that you can't recover, I mean, you're basically screwed. You have no way of recovering unless you've got a backup, and we'll talk about all that as well. So some pearls of wisdom that I think are critical anytime I do any type of presentation. There's no right or wrong way of doing things. There's no best. I'm going to tell you what I recommend. But when I work with an office, we go through the options, and it's a matter of figuring out what's best for that individual practice. There's no best out there. There's no right or wrong way of doing things. There's some dumb decisions you can make, but everything is kind of open to interpretation. Don't put the cart before the horse. What I mean by that is, yes, we need to, tonight's presentation really focuses on cybersecurity and software and things that you can do, but you still need the infrastructure in place as well. I mean, if you have these old Windows 7 computers or XP, God forbid, if you're running Server 2008 or older, there's only so much we can do. You're at risk if you're running an unpatched operating system that no matter how much the stuff we talk about this evening, I can't make up for that. The other thing is, in real estate, they always say the three most important things are location, location, location. For me, it's planning, planning, planning. Nothing wrong with doing things in stages. A lot of our clients will start off with some services and then add it as you go along. As long as you've got a game plan or treatment plan, you're not going to run into issues. So I mentioned at the beginning, and for those of you who may have come a few minutes late, we're going to do a little bit of quiz. You don't need to type in your responses. Actually, please don't, because I want to make sure I can read the questions that come out at the end. This is more just think of the answer in your head. This should give you a good idea where you're at in your understanding of cybersecurity and HIPAA compliance. So first question, if your practice is audited, the first thing the auditors will want to see is A, your backup, B, a risk assessment, C, evidence of encryption, or D, your server. And the answer is a risk assessment. This is critical. It is a HIPAA law. You must do a risk assessment. The best analogy I can give you is a new patient shows up in your practice. You don't just start treating them. I mean, I hope you don't, unless maybe it's an emergency, but you do a diagnostic workup. You take radiographs and intraoral, extraoral exams and cancer screening and perioprobing, restorative charting. And based on all of that, you put together a treatment plan and you start treating them. Same thing with HIPAA. You don't know where you're at risk unless you actually look. So you have to, by law, you have to do a formal risk assessment and develop their version of a treatment plan called the HIPAA management plan. And the reason that's so important is that when they decided, this is back in 2013, when they decided to do the omnibus rules, they created 4 different tiers of fines and penalties. Most of you would probably fall into that first tier, which is that you didn't know and reasonably could have known that there was a breach. The worst one is tier 4, and that what they're looking for is what's called willful neglect. So it's really critical that if you do a risk assessment and have a management plan, that you actually then go about resolving those issues. The whole point of the risk assessment is to figure out where you're at risk. The management plan is a step-by-step plan of what you're going to do. It's not enough to just have that. If you get audited and they see that you did the risk assessment, you've got a plan, but you never lifted a finger to do anything about it, that's willful neglect. That's basically you saying, hey, I knew about this, but I chose not to do anything about it. And that's when you start to see some of these really significant fines and penalties. A couple of my little pet peeves. Number one, there are some companies out there who, say that they can do both OSHA and HIPAA compliance. They could not be further apart as they do. That'd be like going to someone that does dentistry and TV repair. It's just, they're completely different skill sets. They're completely different things. So, a lot of them are just OSHA companies that decided to tack on HIPAA. Kind of related to that is there are some companies out there who will say, hey, you go online and take this 10, 15-minute quiz and you've done your risk assessment. And I can assure you that if you ever get audited, the auditors will have, maybe if they're in a good mood, they'll have a good laugh and they say, no, seriously, where's your risk assessment? That is not a formal risk assessment. When we do it for our clients, it takes 5 to 8 hours on average. You don't need to be there for more than 5 minutes of that, but it takes us a good 5 to 8 hours to run that risk assessment. What you do online just unfortunately is not adequate. So, and we'll talk about how you actually should do it. In 2020, last year, that's the last number we have full numbers for. What was the average ransom demand? Was it $500, $1,000, 5.3 million, or 100? You can probably guess that 3 of those are not even close. This is the average demand. This is across all industries, not in dentistry. In dentistry, we're seeing probably closer to 25 to 50,000 on average for those first-time demands. The one thing I would caution you about, if you're trying to negotiate with these criminals, don't, under any circumstances, ever mention that you have insurance. If they find out that you have insurance, your ability to negotiate drops to zero. There's no way. They will charge you more probably because they know that you're going to be reimbursed by an insurance carrier. So make sure you don't do that. Does HIPAA require that you patch all your software on your computers on a regular basis? Some of you may not know this, but that is actually true. It's called patch management, and there is a HIPAA law that says you have to keep things patched and current. Many of you were probably contacted by your IT providers in late 2019, early 2020, when Microsoft stopped supporting Windows 7. It wasn't the lack of support that was the issue, it was the lack of patches. Microsoft was no longer patching that system. By definition, you are not HIPAA compliant. Now, there's nothing in HIPAA that says you can't run Windows 7. The way that HIPAA works is they don't get that specific. What there is in HIPAA, as we talked about earlier, is it says you have to do a risk assessment, have a management plan, and mitigate those risks. There's nothing you can do to mitigate an unpatched operating system. It doesn't make a difference what type of firewall or antivirus you put on your system. An unpatched operating system is a security risk. So that's why people were being told you need to move to Windows 10. Which of the following should you do if you're hit with a ransomware virus? A, panic. Well, I'm sure a lot of you probably will. Don't. B, ignore it. I wish. C, restore a recent backup. Or D, pay the ransom. The answer is, of course, restore a recent backup once you've made sure that the virus is removed, obviously. It doesn't do you a whole lot of good to restore from a backup if the virus is still on your system. You're just going to get it all over again. So really important that you have a good backup. We'll talk about that. What's the most common method of ransomware infection? Is it spam and phishing emails? Is it not having properly trained staff? Is it that your passwords aren't strong enough? Or is it going to some malicious website? Far and away, the most common way that ransomware viruses get onto your system is through emails. You get an email, it looks like it's from someone you know, or it looks like it's from a company that you do business with. There's a link there, you click it, and at that point it's game over, that they're in your system. So part of the process is obviously making sure that you and your staff are educated on what these emails look like and never clicking a link that you don't have to, unless you know exactly what it's for and you're sure that it's from who you think it is. If you do suffer a data breach, though, what things must you do, if anything? Have your practice listed on the Health and Human Services website, notify the local news media, notify all patients of record in writing, or all the above. And unfortunately, it is all the above. You have to do all those things. Unlike a lot of HIPAA, which is somewhat ambiguous and a little open-ended to interpretation, the breach notification rule is crystal clear, and they're very clear that if you suffered a breach, you must do all the things that we mentioned before. The one that is obviously the most devastating is having to write that letter to all your patients. You can't do it through email. You can't just do it as a sign on your door. You have to actually send a letter to every single one of them, letting them know what data was compromised. Usually we're talking about their name and address and social security numbers and maybe credit card information. It's considered standard of care to provide some type of credit monitoring for those patients. So like I said, this is nasty business. You really don't want to have to ever declare a breach if you can. When is it okay to send patients their records over unencrypted email? And I'm saying unencrypted like regular Gmail or ones like that. A, always, there's no rules about emailing patients their own information. B, if the patient tells you it's okay to do it. C, if the patient signs a waiver. Or D, it's never okay. And it is actually okay, but you have to have that in writing. It really should be part of your new patient process, is that, you know, if you want them to waive that you have them sign it right from the get-go. You certainly can send it over encrypted email, which is what I highly recommend, but if you're going to do it some other way, the patient has to agree to that. Most common way of getting a data breach. We talked about how, you know, you want to try to avoid this. What's the most common way? Is it an email that you sent by mistake to the wrong patient? Is it a lost or stolen mobile device? Is it a server that gets stolen, or is it someone that breaks into the network? Far and away, the most common form of a data breach is a lost or stolen mobile device, typically a laptop, external hard drive. Please make sure, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, if you are going to put data on some type of mobile device and take it out of the office, it it really has to be encrypted. And a lot of offices, unfortunately, are not doing that. Business associates, we I'm sure you've all heard about this, but sometimes we get a lot of questions about this. What is an example of a business associate? Would it be A, Dentrix, B, a referring practice, C, a lab, or D, the cleaning crew? The basic premise of a business associate agreement is that you have to have an agreement with somebody who has access to your patient information, but is not part of the continuum of care. So that would not include insurance companies. It would not include referring practices, labs. The cleaning crew would probably never hopefully have access to your data. But Dentrix is actually a business associate. If you're working with Dentrix or Open Dental, whoever your practice management software company is, and they log into your system to do troubleshooting, they have the ability to potentially see patient information on there. You must have a signed BAA, business associate agreement, with them. Okay, is it against HIPAA rules to send email reminders to patients? And the answer for that is false. It's not against the rules. You can do it. Now, you obviously want to, as with anything, it's minimal information necessary. Mrs. Jones reminding you about your 2:30 appointment on Friday is fine. Mrs. Jones reminding you about your 2:30 appointment on Friday for your implant on tooth number 30, and please make sure you take your pre-medication for your heart murmur. That, not so much. So you want to have minimal information that's out there, if at all possible. If you encrypt your data, you're exempt from the breach notification. Is that true or false? Well, I kind of already alluded to this before when I talked about external hard drives. And the answer is true. This is truly, no pun intended, your only get out of jail free card. If you have suffered what would normally be a breach, someone getting access to your server, or someone getting that external hard drive or a laptop, or God forbid a phone. I don't know why people put patient information on their phones, but if that happens and you have evidence, you can't just say, well, we did it, but if you have evidence that you have encrypted that data, you do not need to declare a breach, and that's huge. So there's really no excuse not to encrypt it, and we'll talk about how easy it is to do that. What's the deadliest animal in Africa? Is it the hippo, the ruffle-nosed boar, human, or tiger? It's hippo. This is kind of a joke question. The reason I put this in is that if I had $1 for every time someone spelled HIPAA wrong, I could probably retire. HIPAA has 1 P and 2 A's. It's HIPAA. There are not 2 P's in HIPAA. Okay, antivirus software is the best defense against ransomware. Unfortunately, we have a lot of clients who think this is true, but it's not. The problem, as we're seeing lately, is that a lot of ransomware viruses are what's called zero-day infections. And it's a fancy way of saying that it's so new that your antivirus software doesn't know that it's a virus. It doesn't know what to do with it. That's where something like application whitelisting, I think, is so effective, and we'll get into that. You must use a HIPAA certified firewall in a healthcare setting. Is that true or false? The answer is false, and the reason for that, there's 2 words there that never should go together, and that's HIPAA and certified. HIPAA does not certify anything. There is no such thing as a HIPAA certified software, hardware, anything. Even again, a bit of a pet peeve. You really can't say that a software or a product is HIPAA compliant. The product itself is not compliant, or the software is not compliant. HIPAA compliance is a set of things that you do to get yourself more compliant as a covered entity, as a practice. But the hardware and software in and of itself isn't compliant. It helps you to get more compliant because, for example, maybe they're encrypted, or maybe they have password policies or other things like that that allows you to get more compliant. But there's no such thing as HIPAA certified. But we can still use the word HIPAA compliant. So which of these is a HIPAA compliant way to share patient files? Using a thumb drive, a regular Gmail, not the paid version, Dropbox, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, or none of the above. None of those are good. You really need to stay away from that stuff. It's got to be HIPAA compliant, meaning encrypted, has to do auditing and logging, so you can track who accessed the information and when did they access it, what do they do with it. Really impossible to do with those other systems that I talked about. If you're hit with a ransomware virus, you must report a breach. Is that true or false? Well, again, maybe it's something that people didn't know. In 2016, Health and Human Services, OCR, made a determination that if you are hit with ransomware, you have suffered a breach. Now, most of us don't think of breaches in those terms. We think of a breach as, well, you lost your hard drive or someone hacked into the network. The way that OCR HHS defines a breach is loss of control of your data, which is exactly what a ransomware does. It locks the files. So that is a breach. And this is the document. As I said, you can do a search online for HHS 2016 or OCR 2016 ransomware. You'll find this document as well. The important thing is that number 7 at the bottom there. And I've blown that up. What they basically say is it's a ransomware infection is a breach unless there's a low probability of compromise. And you have to answer these 4 questions. The problem is that for most offices, you're going to be answering no to 3 of those 4. You know, is the nature and extension of the PHI and like the re-identification low? No, it's patient information. It's like their name, their address, their credit card information. It's all there. Do you know the person to who that disclosure was made to? No, you don't know who it is. Do you know if they actually looked at that information when they were logged into your network? No, you don't know that. Yeah, the last one, yes, you certainly can mitigate the risk by eliminating the virus. But if your answer is no to 3 of the 4, then I don't think you can say that there's a low probability of compromise. Let's talk a little about some of these definitions, because we're using these terms a lot, but I think it's important to at least have a baseline understanding of it. Cybersecurity is just a bunch of processes and practices that you do that protect networks, devices, your data from attack, from damage, or someone getting access to it. Sometimes we use it like information technology security. It basically means the same thing. For dental offices, when we talk about cybersecurity, we're really talking about a bunch of different things. We're talking about a firewall, encryption, patching, and we're going to go through all this, by the way, afterwards. Anti-ransomware software, antivirus software, application whitelisting, backup and disaster recovery, training your staff, and doing that risk assessment as well. What about ransomware? I mean, we've heard so much about it, but what exactly is it? It's a type of malware. Malware is viruses, worms, spyware, things like that, that basically prevents you from accessing your system. It either locks the screen or locks the files. The most common ones more recently are locking the files. Sometimes we use the word crypto ransomware, and it can encrypt certain types of files. And basically, you get a little note on your computer screen that says pay this ransom or else. I can actually show you what that looks like because it's happened to one of our clients. And again, I apologize, it's a little small on the screen, but they came into their office one morning and this was popped up on the screen. You'll notice a couple things here. First off, you can't use your regular browser or anything like that. They want you to use what's called a Tor browser. It's an encrypted browser. When you eventually get a hold of them and try to hopefully negotiate a little bit for the ransom, it's important that you understand that they don't take credit cards, they don't take cash, they don't take checks. It's Bitcoin usually, or some other types of cryptocurrency that usually can't be tracked. It's gone once it leaves you. You have no way of tracking it, no way of recovering it. Actually, with that previous example I told you with Colonial Pipeline, they actually were able to recover a good chunk of that, but they had the full weight of the U.S. government behind them. That won't be the case for the typical dental office. What are the consequences of being hit with ransomware? You're going to suffer some downtime. As I said, the most critical thing is to figure out how it got in there and remove it. That can take a day or two, depending on how bad it is. And for the average dental office, when you look, and this is not what the ransom that you pay, this is just the cost of the downtime. It's going to be in the tens of thousands of dollars. Now, obviously, if you have a large group practice, your DSO, it's going to be significantly higher than that. But this is on average. We can usually get a lot of our clients up within about 2 or 3 days. If we know exactly how it got in, we're sure that we got it out. But as I said, it's just affecting everyone. This was Accenture. One thing to be aware of is that even if you have a backup, and we'll talk about the importance of a backup, what these criminals are now doing is called double extortion and triple extortion. They know that, that I showed you that slide where 44% of people have backups. Hopefully in dentistry, it's higher than that. They know a lot of people have backups. So what they do is they say, hey, we know you probably have a backup. You're not going to pay us. That's fine. We're going to take your data. We're going to put it online. If that's the double extortion. If that still is not enough to convince you to pay up, then you get into the triple extortion where they say, hey, oh yeah, by the way, we also got a hold of your software and we've been able to get in there and we see all the information for your patients. We're going to start calling them up. So they've gotten pretty aggressive in how they want to make sure that they get it. So you're obviously, the best thing is to make sure that you never get it in the first place. We'll talk about how to do that and how to deal with it if it does get through. Breach notification, and again, we talked about this. It is one of the few things in HIPAA that I think is unbelievably clear-cut, that if you're breached, you have to notify Health and Human Services, you have to notify the media as long as you've had 500 or more patients, which will cover almost everyone on this call, and you have to send out that letter to all those people as well. It would be devastating, I think, to any practice. So what's the approach that I want to take to deal with this? We talked a lot about statistics, we talked a lot about some concepts. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of what I actually recommend that you do. First and foremost, is that we've already been alluding to, you want to keep the bad guys out. You want to prevent them from ever getting in the first place. However, nothing you do is 100%. So you have to be able to deal with that malware, that ransomware, if it gets in. You want to make sure that from a HIPAA standpoint, you are encrypted so that you potentially don't have to declare that breach. You want to make sure that you can recover, that you've got proper backup and disaster recovery. Hopefully you have some type of insurance. We recommend this for everyone. When we do a risk assessment and a management plan for any of our clients, we automatically bundle in a minimum of $250,000 of cyber liability insurance. I think it's critical that you have that. It doesn't add that much to the cost at this point. As I said, eventually it's going to get pretty expensive. And you need to make sure that you're doing a risk assessment so that you know that this doesn't happen in the future. How do we keep those bad guys out? Two ways: firewalls and patching. Well, what's a firewall? Again, these are terms that we in IT use, but maybe if you're not an IT professional, you don't know what I'm talking about. It's a network security device. It monitors ingoing and outgoing traffic, and it decides whether to allow it or block it based on security rules. We've been using firewalls for a couple of decades or longer now. It really is just a great barrier to have that secures and controls your internal network versus the outside internet. Even though firewalls can be software, 99.9% of the ones that we recommend for an office would be hardware-based firewalls. It really is something you should do: install and use a business class firewall. When I say business class, the ones that I'm usually talking about are ones like Sophos and SonicWall. A lot of you are probably using the ones that are built into your routers, Linksys and D-Link and Netgear, and those. There's nothing in HIPAA that says you have to use one firewall versus another, but you tend to get what you pay for. And those really cheap ones and ones that are built into your cable modem are really not great. And I would highly recommend you invest in a good quality business class firewall. If you want to make sure that's actually working, that's again, when we do a risk assessment for any office, we do penetration testing where we actually see if we can get through the firewall. That's one thing that's critical. So as I said, the ones that we normally recommend are Sophos. These are not cheap, but they're not terrible expensively either. They're like $600, $700, depending on the model and features. You don't want to go crazy. You don't need to spend $3,000, $4,000 on a Cisco enterprise firewall. But as I said, the $100 ones that you get from Linksys are probably not the best solution either. We talked about this a little bit. You have to, by law, update your systems with security patches as soon as they become available. We don't allow Microsoft to actually do the patching. We do what's called patch management for our clients, and we don't like Microsoft's patching schedule. First off, because it's usually on a Tuesday night or a Wednesday. We don't like. And a lot of times their patches have more problems than they're worth. So we want to have a little more control over the patching process. Any good IT provider that works in healthcare should do something like this. They'll call it managed services is one way of describing it. You might be an MSP, a managed service provider. It's just a fancy way of saying automation, that we have software that can do a lot of this stuff for us automatically versus having to manually go out and find all the patches and do it on your own. But you have to patch as quickly as you can. It doesn't take long. Usually, once they just the hackers discover some type of loophole or some type of security loophole, they can get in within days and take advantage of that. A lot of you have been hearing about the one that's I can't remember the name of it. It's the one that's got announced a few days ago that could potentially affect hundreds of millions of devices. So log FG or something, or J or something like that. But this is serious stuff. As much as we would like the software, the firewalls to do what they need to do, the fact is that it's not 100% foolproof. And as I mentioned, we talked about the fact that a lot of the newest ransomware, newest viruses are 0-day, where we just don't have an actual way for the software to know that it's a virus. So how do we deal with that? First off, you always should have a basic antivirus software in place. And make sure it's always current and up to date. There's a lot of good ones out there. We usually use Nod32 ESET for our clients. You want to make sure you get spyware off it as well. There are better ones out there that I think than just ESET. What we've always been recommending for people is that they actually supplement that with ransomware specific software. There's some good programs out there. So for antivirus, we tend to stay away from the free ones like Avira. I like ESET. I never liked Norton, but I'm sure there's some people that still use it. The ones that are specific for ransomware, I think, are better. Intercept X is one that we use for our clients. There's Hitman Pro Alert. They're actually all owned by the same company. They're all part of Sophos now, so they basically kind of do the same things. We just like Intercept X, but I highly recommend something like this. I alluded to this a little bit earlier, but for me, the game changer, the one that I think is going to protect offices more than any other thing that you can do, is something we call application whitelisting and ring fencing. I think this really is the greatest tool against malware that I've seen in the 20 years I've been doing IT. What is it? It's basically the practice of developing what's called a whitelist. You make a list of all the software that's on your systems that we say this is approved. Any program that is not on that list can't run. It's basically, think of it like you're going to a fancy nightclub and there's a really big bouncer at the front door. If you're not on the list, you ain't getting in. So this is kind of the same way. It's the whole goal of this is to protect computers from harmful applications. Ring fencing, which is somewhat different. With ring fencing, for example, with a lot of practice management software programs, we'll work with third-party programs. With programs, for example, like NextHealth that do patient reminders and appointment scheduling and things like that. Ring fencing builds fences, and it says here are the programs that are allowed to access our database. If you're not on that list, you can't actually get into that database. So it's basically like a second level of protection. So I think this infographic probably describes it the best. We do a full system scan. We usually let that run for about a week or two. It's in what we call learning mode. We build up that whitelist. We compare. We have about 350 clients that we are actively monitoring right now. So we'll have like a global database of all the approved software programs. At a certain point, we flip the switch, I say a week or two, and it goes into what's called deny all mode, which basically means if it ain't on that list, it's denied. It'll actually give you a pop-up. I'll show what that looks like. And it'll prompt that you have to basically approve it. As your IT provider, we'd be the ones that have to approve it. We don't want you or your staff if you're not exactly sure what the program is. But this is what would happen, is that on your screen, you would get something like this. It says, you get a request to run a new program. You would fill out any information if you wanted to, and just hit the send request, and it goes right to our technicians. We'd be able to review it, obviously get a hold of you, let you know, yes, the whole process from the time that we start to approve a program to the time that you can start using it is somewhere around 90 seconds, give or take. It just depends. There's a little bit of a lag when we actually flip that switch. But you really, as I said, you want the IT provider. We don't know actually if any of IT providers besides us that are doing this, but whoever is doing this for you, you really want them handling this for you, because there's a lot of programs out there. The only time it's ever a minor inconvenience, and I use the word minor. Let's say you're an OpenDental user. OpenDental has just released a patch. You get that patch, you go to apply it. The application whitelisting is going to say, well, hold on a second here. This kind of looks like a program that I'm familiar with, but it's not exactly like it. So I'm not going to let it through yet. as I said, we go through that process. So for a minute and a half, 2 minutes, you get approved and you go about your business. If you're the unlucky first person to get that open dental patch, you're going to have to deal with that. Everyone else won't, because that's now been added to our global list. So the next person number 2 who gets that patch and goes to apply it, they won't get that pop-up because it's already been pre-approved by our technicians. So it's a really slick process, and it's something we highly recommend. And by the way, a lot of times people ask, well, is this really expensive? Our typical client who is getting this type of software, most of our clients have about 10 to 15 computers on average, some a little bit more, some a little bit less. Our typical client is paying less than $100 a month. It's usually like $99 a month to have this type of software. I think it's really cost effective for what it does. It doesn't mean you should get rid of the firewall or antivirus software or anti-ransomware or get rid of your backup. As I said, the days of just throwing one solution, this antivirus software at the problem, are gone. You have to do basically a stacked approach. You have to start really looking at a package or a suite or multiple layers. Think of it kind of as wearing a belt and suspenders at the same time. And you really want to throw everything you can at this. The other thing, the third step here is that you really want to encrypt it and lock everything down. Encryption, I think, is just the easiest way to do this. I think there's a lot of confusion out there when it comes to the HIPAA requirements for HIPAA for encryption, because encryption is what's called addressable. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are not quite clear what addressable means. There's 2 types of HIPAA rules, addressable and mandatory. Mandatory means you have to do it, no questions asked. Addressable means that a covered entity, meaning you, must implement a specification if it's reasonable and appropriate to do so, and must implement an equivalent alternative if the addressable implementation specification is unreasonable and if there's a reasonable alternative. So what does this really say in plain English? It means if it's reasonable and appropriate, you have to do it. If not, you have to come up with an alternative or document why you think it's not reasonable and appropriate. The whole issue here is reasonable and appropriate. Who gets to decide that? Yes, it's you at this point. If you're ever audited, it's going to be the auditor. And something like encryption, that's going to be a really hard argument to make. The reason for that is that every version of Windows from Windows 10 onwards, Windows Server from 2012 onward, has a built-in encryption program called BitLocker. It's free, it's there. Now you probably want to work with an IT company to help you set it up and spend a few hours of their labor to do it properly, but it's not like you have to go out and spend thousands of dollars on this high-end software. It's already built in there. Like I said, that's going to be a hard argument to win. You're talking to an auditor and we say, well, we don't think it's reasonable and appropriate to encrypt our data, even though the program is free and it's sitting there in my software right now. I could do it in the next few minutes and get it done. So good luck with that. If you are using an older practice management software, which again, I don't recommend because it means you're not being patched, but there are free programs out there like VeraCrypt and TrueCrypt, and you've got a lot of good options for free programs that can also do encryption for you. One of the things I think that will save you the most, though, if a virus does get through, is having a good backup and disaster recovery. It is critical that you have a good backup program in place. Hopefully, most of you are not using tapes or anymore. I think I may have tried it once about 25 years ago. The problem with tape backup is, of course, that you need a tape drive, and oftentimes the tape drive is in the server. The server goes down because there's been a power supply problem or it crashed or whatever. That tape it's a great paperweight, but it's not going to do much else good for you. Rewritable CD-ROMs, we tried those in DVDs for a while, still somewhat limited to their capacity and they were slow. Portable hard drives, we still have offices using it. We actually don't try to talk people out of using the portable external hard drives. As I said earlier, you have to make sure they're encrypted if you're taking them out of the office. There's really not a whole lot of reason to use it if you're going to keep them in the office. It doesn't do you any good if there's a fire or a flood or theft or something like that. And these come in all shapes and sizes as well. We've seen it more of a push towards people maybe starting to add this back to what we've typically been recommending, because you may want to start looking at what's called an air-gapped backup. And what that basically means is that people are so worried about ransomware. We haven't had, the way that we do our backup, we haven't had any instances of it getting up to the online portion. We'll talk about that in a second. We've never seen that happen yet. Doesn't mean it can't happen, it hasn't happened for the way that we do our backup. But people are still concerned that, hey, if I have a local backup and an off-site backup and they're all kind of connected, they could all be hit with ransomware. An air gap basically means that you have a backup that is not connected. There's actually air between that device and the rest of your network. There's no cable, nothing. So you put it onto an external hard drive, you disconnect that, take it home. It's a pain in the rear, and that's why we've gotten away from that. But with ransomware, we have some offices that are asking about adding that back in, and we say, fine, there's no reason not to. The software comes in all shapes and sizes. You can get free programs like Karen's Replicator and more advanced ones like SyncBack Pro. The thing that is critical, I think, with your backup is that it has to be offsite. This is a HIPAA law. The word that they use is retrievable. As I said, if your office burns down, if there's a flood, someone walks in and walks out with your computers, you have to have it offsite. You can do the external hard drives. I think some type of cloud or online data storage is far easier. It's off-site, it's secure, it's automated. It's just a much easier way of doing things. The things that you really want to look for is make sure that it's HIPAA compliant, that it uses encryption keys. Whichever company, you want to make sure they have multiple copies of those servers, all over the country, so that if the data center goes down, that they've got recover from as well. You want something that can use copy open databases. EagleSoft, for example, and Open Dental, Dentrix Image, they're all open databases, meaning you typically you have to close the software down or stop the database from running to get a good backup. Obviously, you want to have multiple copies of your data. If your data gets corrupted, sometimes you have to go back a few days to get a good copy of the data. Be able to restore not just the whole server, but individual files, and make it an automated process. We do this for our clients. We call it Data Protect. There's all kinds of systems out there. I would, again, really recommend that you consider working with an IT professional. And I apologize if that sounds self-serving, but especially in healthcare, you want someone that knows what they're doing, that understands HIPAA. There are multiple HIPAA laws when it comes to the backup, as far as how it's done, how you test and verify it on a regular basis, how you audit and log for that. The encryption is something that companies like Mozy or Carbonite may not be aware of. So please also be aware that if you have a server with mirrored hard drives, we call that RAID, that is not a backup, that's redundancy. Again, it's not going to help you if the office burns down. You have to have something that's off-site, either a external hard drive or online. The way that we do our backup is that we make an emergency server. It doesn't have to be a full server. It can be on like a souped up Dell workstation. It can be on an external hard drive, although those take longer, where we do what's called an image, an exact duplicate of the entire server, not just the data, but the program files, the network settings, everything. Let's say your server goes down for whatever reason, we fire up that virtual copy of the server, and ideally within minutes, sometimes it can take an hour or two, but within minutes, you're up and running. As far as the other computers are concerned, the server is back up and running. You want to be able to measure your downtime in minutes, not days, which is the reality for a lot of offices, unfortunately. I highly recommend, as I said, some type of cyber liability insurance. We get this for our clients. We use Chubb for cyber liability. There's other good companies out there. I did want to make sure I stress, we are not insurance agents. We're not selling insurance. We can work with our clients to get them in touch with Chubb, to get quotes for them. We can facilitate that process. Most of the carriers are now requiring that you provide some type of evidence that you're doing all the things you're supposed to be doing, firewalls and backup and all the things that, before they would even consider covering you. But we are not actually writing insurance policies. I'm not a licensed insurance provider, so I wanted to be clear about that. How about a risk assessment? We see, as I said, it's my pet peeve that some of these companies tell you to go online and do these little 10, 15-minute online quizzes and you're done. That's really not reality. The problem with doing an actual risk assessment, if you look at the HIPAA requirements, you see it there, it's under 2A, conduct an accurate and thorough assessment of the risk, yada, yada, yada. That's it. That is the only thing that you'll see in HIPAA that gives you any direction. There is no direction. That being the case, there is a document out there. It's by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's document 800-30, how to do a risk assessment. If you suffer from insomnia, this is a great document for you because it will put you to sleep. It is 95 pages long. It is as dry can be, but I can give you the Reader's Digest version. As most of you already know, it's no different than doing the diagnostic workup for a patient. You got to be thorough. It's not enough to just so you have to do an administrative review. Look at the policies and procedure manuals, incident response forms. You need to look at things from a physical standpoint, locks on the doors, security systems, where do you keep the charge at night, things like that. The bulk of the risk assessment is IT. And again, this is one of my pet peeves about these OSHA HIPAA companies, or someone that was an OSHA company that's now providing HIPAA services. You need an IT professional that's really versed in HIPAA, that understands how to do this. Like I said, it takes us multiple hours to do a risk assessment. We look at everything from password policies to encryption to network shares to so many different things that unless you are an IT provider, you just wouldn't know how to do this type of stuff. So make sure whoever's doing this for you really has a good understanding of healthcare HIPAA compliance, because it's not something that you want to find out after the fact, when they've already come in for the audit, that you don't have the proper assessment in place. This just shows you the system that we use for our clients. It gives them a risk score. I'm not sure how they actually come out with that number, because we've never seen a number lower than 90. I think maybe it's just to encourage people to get off their rear ends and actually do something to handle all their risks. But we'll give them a full risk analysis that goes through everything that we find, non-administrative logons and passwords that don't expire and domain administrators and unpatched operating systems and spyware that's not up to date and users that aren't logged. I mean, it's very, very thorough. It really should be this type of level of thoroughness. And that's the risk assessment. And then we'll actually give them a management plan where we show them, here's where you're at high risk. Here's the ones that have operating systems that aren't being supported. Here's the ones that don't have screen locks on, all this type of stuff. So, it's something that when we do it for our clients, we always say to them, listen, it's not enough to just do the risk assessment and have the plan. You have to actually follow through. Most of the time, for most of our clients, we're talking about 6 to 10 hours of labor, give or take, to handle all the things on there. So you should be committed that whoever's doing the risk assessment and is going to help you handle it, you need to be committed to working with them to actually help you follow through with that process. It's not enough to just have the risk assessment. So kind of wrapping things up here, what are the steps that I think that you should do right now to get yourself more HIPAA compliant, get yourself more cyber secure? Do a risk assessment. There's nothing in the HIPAA laws that says you have to do it annually. They say regular. I highly recommend doing annual at the least. Most of our clients, we do it at least 2 times a year. Some of them want to do it quarterly, 3 or 4 times. When you've done the first assessment, we usually find so many things. We actually typically do recommend doing it quarterly. It helps you stay on top of it. Every quarter we'll go in, do another assessment, make sure you're staying on top of things, getting those things addressed. As I said, it takes multiple hours of time to actually resolve those issues, but you have to do the risk assessment. You have to develop their version of a treatment plan called the HIPAA management plan. You need to have a policies and procedure manual. We do this again for all of our clients. One caution I would give you: a lot of people get the ADA policies and procedure manual. It's about $400. They never crack it open. They stick it up on a shelf and don't worry about it. If you ever do get around to opening it up, you'll know what a lot of people have already figured out. It's not a manual, it's a template. There are a lot of blank lines in there. It's going to take you days and days and days to fill that stuff in. We've had a number of clients who have gone through audits. We've never found anyone that's gotten dinged by an auditor actually going through their policies and procedure manual line by line or anything like that. They want to see that you've got one and that it's current. That's basically it. But make sure you have one way or the other. As I said, you should have some type of cyber liability insurance by the time you get through the fines and penalties, the downtime. As I mentioned, it's considered standard of care to provide some type of credit monitoring for those patients if you've suffered a breach. You really want to start with about 250,000. We have some offices that are larger practices that do 500,000, $1 million. We can do, we can work with our carrier to do whatever you want, but for first-time offenses, if you're a solo or have 2 or 3 locations, 250 is probably fine. Get encrypted, not just your server, but any devices that have patient information. In a perfect world, all your patient data is on the server. Reality is that's not always the way that it is. You know, sometimes you might have, if the dentist, you might have some patient photos on your desktop. Maybe your office manager has some spreadsheets or Word documents on hers. Any device that has patient information called EPHI, Electronic Protected Health Information, has to be encrypted. It also has to be backed up, which is part of the reason why we recommend doing it on the server. That way you only have to back up one device versus multiple devices. You really should be using an encrypted email system. Both the ones that we recommend will work with your existing email address. There's a lot of good ones out there. We like AppRiver, Secure Mail, you know, Google, they used to be called G Suite, Google for Workplace. They keep changing the name every few months, but basically, if you pay for it, it's probably encrypted. If it's free, it's probably not. So invest in it, and you don't have to spend a lot. You know, we're normally looking at $5 to $10 per user per month for a decent encrypted email system, but I definitely recommend that. As I already talked about, you have to have a good backup and disaster recovery system. And as I mentioned, from a HIPAA standpoint, and also for peace of mind, you really should be testing and verifying that on a regular basis. How do you do that? Turn off your server and start to restore. How long does it take you? And again, if it's measured in anything more than an hour or two, time to reevaluate how you're doing your backup. That's the easiest way to see, is my backup actually working, and how quickly can we get up and running. That's the more critical issue for most offices. It's not, am I backing up the data? It's how quickly can I get up and running again? You should be doing network monitoring, patch management. Again, it's a HIPAA law that says you have to do that. You should have some basic antivirus software. The one that's built into Windows, Defender, it's so-so, you know, mediocre at best. We recommend third-party antivirus software, ransomware specific software that we talked about as well, application whitelisting. If you're only gonna do one thing, this is the thing that I would do. And by the way, I'm gonna send an email out tomorrow with the link to the recording, the CE credits for those of you who stayed on for the whole presentation as well. I'll also include links to the different things that we've been talking about, talk about some of the pricing as well. So you don't have to take notes or anything like that. This will all go out in an email to you tomorrow, so you can follow up if you'd like to. Make sure you have signed BAA's, Business Associates Agreement, with anyone that has access to your data that's not also part of the care process. So no labs or referring offices, but your IT company for sure, your email provider for sure, any practice management consultant that's logging into your software, into your network, your practice management software company, if they're logging in, anyone that's logging into your network for sure, you have to have that signed BAA with them. You should do training as well. And again, I'll send out the link to this. We have a few online companies that we're happy with, where your staff go online. It's about a 45-minute training. They can start and stop whenever they want. And when I say your staff, it means you too. Everyone has to be trained.